Here we go. Time to work on that body. What's up, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. If you were following my first video with droid building, you survived the legs. Now we're going into the body. Now the body is going to be a lot less overwhelming for sure. It's pretty simple in terms of printing and just pretty much straightforward almost. Now, before we get started, I do know I left off the shoulders and the shoulder hubs from the leg video because I like doing them with the body, which we'll go over. So if you have been building your legs and you saw the shoulders in those leg files, don't worry, we're going over that today. So the other thing too, before we get started as well, I highly recommend going over to McMaster Car, and they're going to be your best friend for this entire build. Now we've got some M4 square nuts and M4 by 10 millimeter flathead bolts. You're going to go through a lot of these with the body itself because all of the greeblies and things like that are actually held in with that size nut and bolt. So I just picked up the 100 pack. You're going to go through them. There's a lot of, throughout the entire build, there's a lot of these nuts and bolts that you're going to use. So I would just recommend it. Like I said, they're going to be your best friend. Now, before we get into the files for the body itself, let's talk shoulders and shoulder hubs. Now, the reason I held off on these is because it is for fitment issues. The actual shoulders themselves are going to mount inside the body. These are going to mount through it, and I'm going to do a walkthrough on how this and the insert go together because it's very confusing to a lot of newer builders. Obviously, if you've been making these for a while, you know how they go. So we'll do a quick walkthrough on how that goes together. But for reference on how I've made these, same as the legs. 6 walls, 40% infill. These are a structural part. You don't want this failing as well. You need this to be strong because there's nuts and bolts and things holding the legs to this, which is holding the body up. So I can't stress this enough. These need to be just as sturdy. Same with the shoulders themselves. I have 6 walls, 40% infill. They are rock solid. These are the main components basically that are holding the body up. Because the body is now going to be anywhere between, depending on how light or strong you want it, it could be anywhere between 10 to 15 pounds. I know it doesn't seem like a lot, but over time with movement and things, it can add up and stress and things like that. So I just like these to be very strong. So here we are back in the files. Now I'm doing 2 different sets of files for this build. I am planning on using the MK3 body, and I will be using the back panel version. But unfortunately, they are only certain size. I don't have printers large enough anymore to print these pieces, so I'm going to be cutting these pieces in bamboo slicer to get my needs. But before we start with anything, we're going to go into the main body and skirt, and we're going to go into the cut body by Leon DeGraff, and we're going to go in, and you can see all of the main body pieces are there. But we're going to go into the skirt. We're going to talk about the skirt first. And as you can see, large and small. Now, I opted with the larger size. It's 4 pieces, and one of those pieces, unfortunately, is just a little bit large on the bamboo. So I did have to cut that one. Now, if you don't want to deal with that and you just want to use the small version, I believe it's cut into 6 different pieces that you'll simply glue together, and everything lines up that way. Okay, so you've made it this far. You've decided which body you want to go with, whether it's a removable back door, whether it's just the cut files and you don't want to mess with it. Whatever you decide, that's great. Now we're going to talk about settings. Now, if you read the instructions, which I'm hoping you guys are going through and reading instructions, doing some research as well on what you would like to do, because there are so many options for this build. I'm doing a basic build because R5 never really showed a bunch of functionality on other stuff like R2 has over the years. So I'm keeping this very basic for me, for what I want and my needs. So with that, after you've decided that, you've been reading the instructions, it does say to print the body at a 0.3 layer height, 10% infill, all this other stuff. And it works. It does work. My original body that I showed in the previous video was printed that way, but it's not the greatest. If, I guess I could say it. Maybe it could have been because I was barely getting into 3D printing at that point. I don't know, but since then I have learned. I now like 4 walls, 15% infill with gyroid infill. It is a very sturdy and well built print, especially when you combine everything. It's very durable now, especially when you're driving them around and things like that. So I stick with those files. Main body and skirt is now 4 walls, 15% infill with gyroid infill. Okay, and on that, the only other thing we talk about now is the greeblies for the body itself. Now, I don't use 4 walls and 15% infill. With these, I just use 2 walls and 15% infill. You don't need these things to be bulletproof or anything like that. You just need these because they're just decoration. Plus, it does help with the load a little bit, being a little bit lighter, because this will start to add up over time with some weight. So basically, yeah, 2 walls, 15% infill is really all you need for these, and they would turn out great. So here you see our basic layout for the skirt. Everything fits nicely, with the exception of this one. And you can actually see the darker area right there. It just does not fit. I have tried everything to possibly get it to fit. It is just the way it's cut and the way it's designed is just a touch too big, unfortunately. So in order for me to fix that, so I printed it as it should. I just highlighted it real quick, went up to the uh, cut option, rotated this 90 degrees, and actually cut it right in the middle of that seam there. Um, you can see it splits it just enough so I can get some grips on it, make the cut, and there we go. And then at this point, I just add another plate, and we're gonna highlight this, face it down, and then move it over to there. And we're just gonna do that. And now I have all of my plates ready to go for the skirt. Now that I have main body ring 2 loaded up, I'm going to use the cut tool again, basically cutting the ring in half and then taking each piece, cutting each piece in half again, right down the middle for each part. This way, if I accidentally lose anything, I know exactly how I cut it. I wrote down exactly all the measurements and everything. So load up the build plates, and now I can just click send, and I'll have all the parts ready to go. Now with cutting main body 3, I did have to add supports here, otherwise it won't print properly. And real quick too, before we get into the files, I do want to say Michael has created these files. They are phenomenal. He is a master at creating files that do not need supports. Everything can print basically without supports. There's about 5% of these files that you will need supports for, but for the main body that we're doing, no supports are required. If you feel like using supports just as a precaution, that's okay. But you really don't need them, which is great. So it's saving filament. I actually went ahead and used supports this time on some areas of this build, just because I'm still tweaking some of my settings for my PETG. And I just wanted the overhangs on a couple spots to print a little bit better than the first body that I did. Now, real quick, I did a little bit of research and I looked into those MK3 cut for Prusa files. Now, that actually are files for the removable back door that are already pre-cut. So if you don't want to go through the hassle of what I did to cut the body to get everything printed, you can certainly use these files. You'll have some more pieces to print, but it should roughly be about the same time frame to print all these pieces. You're just going to have to glue some more pieces together, but it's either way, you don't have to mess with the hassle of cutting like I did. I'm going to certainly look into the removable back door files for this, as I was going to have to cut the back door anyways, because I do not have a machine that's large enough to print this in one piece, unfortunately. So on that note, time to get printing and let's go to assembly. So we've got the skirt all printed. Now I'm going to be gluing this all again, and I'm using the Oaty Purple Power Primer. Just absolutely love this stuff. I'm so glad my buddy Andy got me hooked on this stuff as it fuses all these pieces together. So it works out great. I love it. As you can see, I'm gluing all the parts together, getting them fused, clamping everything down so I can let everything sit overnight, as this will be sitting for about 24 hours. Now, real quick, let's talk hardware. This is everything you're going to need for the skirt because this will get bolted to the body. You're going to need 8 of the M6 by 35 millimeter bolts. You're going to need 4 of the M6 by 50 millimeter bolts, and you're going to need the nuts as well for M6 bolts, as everything gets mounted into the skirt so it can get bolted into the body. Now, I'm not going to bore you with putting this whole thing together, but just so you are aware of how this thing goes, there are grooves underneath the holes here, and the hex head is actually going to sit flush in there. Once in place, you're then going to take your skirt piece and you're going to slide it in. It's going to hold it into place. Now, when you're doing this, the 4 50 millimeter bolts are actually going to go on the center ones on the sides, and the center ones for the outer part as well, because when you add the support bar, you need the bolts to go up higher because it's otherwise they're not going to attach properly. Now, real quick too, unfortunately, because I printed this in black, you're not really going to see it, but when you do print the skirt, you're going to see an actual channel on the inside here. You're going to take your take your bolt, you're just going to slide it into that channel, and then you're just going to push it through. And then if you don't feel the hex head being flush like it is currently, give it a twist, pull it through, good to go. Take your skirt peg, insert it. You can glue it however you want to do it at this point, and it's ready to go. Now we have the skirt assembled, everything in place, all the bolts where they need to be. I did go through, and I'm not sure you can really see or not, but I did go through and weld in the skirt pegs as well. The bolts aren't going anywhere, so it just makes sense to weld the pin in place. This way you know it's not going to get moved on you. Doesn't really have to be this way. I just do it for added security because once it gets bolted to the body anyways, the bolts are going to stay. Moving on to main ring 1, I like to glue down the number 8 by 32 nuts into the body. And into the little opening there. I know people don't like doing it this way. I like doing it this way. It's just me, so I'm just making sure everything is lined up properly. So when I get the threaded rod installed, I can just tighten everything down. Just be careful not to get glue in the threads. Now, real quick, main 1 does require dowels for aligning purposes. I had these files from a previous build that I scaled down. I'll get the measurements. This way, if you look on Thingiverse or something along those lines, you could probably find a dowel file of some sort. So when I get the measurements, I'll get that posted as well. This way, everything will line up properly now when I glue main ring 1 together. Okay, so I've got the body all glued together. I used some 2-part epoxy on the seams. Those just really help to fill in gaps, makes it easier for finishing so you're not going to see those lines. And it also helps too for extra strength, so it's going to prevent some of the cracking or anything like that when it goes in use, because if it's not glued properly, it can crack, unfortunately. But doing it this way, I've had pretty good results, and that's why I continue to do it. Now, the other part too is I have Gorilla Tape in the center, and I've also got it kind of surrounding the rest of the body on some certain spots, just because I want to make sure that all of the lines are lined up properly, so everything will be straight. So in the center detail lines here, they'll be nice and straight. Just for me personally, this is just what I like to do. Real quick too, after I have glued everything together, I then put the top ring. So you're going to have your main rings for the body, and then you're going to have your top ring, which we'll talk about that next. I have that in as well with the number 8 32 screw or nuts tightened down. But then for added measure, because the legs are so heavy, I have now piled them on top of the body itself. All that weight nice and compressed. All of these seams where the cut lines are now going to sit nice and flat. Everything should be sealed up really nicely, so I don't have to worry about that. Again, the cracking or anything like that. This just ensures I have everything sealed and glued properly. So about 24 hours has passed, and now I am removing all of the tape and everything, and there are some gaps in here that I'm going to fix. I'm just going to weld in some PETG to fill in those seams. But now for the fun part, I'm going to start filling in all the empty spots, making sure all the body greeblies fit properly. So this is where your M4 screws and nuts come into play, because they all screw in from the back. If you can kind of see right there, there's a couple of screws where I've got one of the greeblies in place. So I'm going to go through, test fit everything, and make sure everything fits properly. How the body greeblies work: you're going to take your square nuts and you're going to slide them into these openings. They'll drop down, and you can see where the two mounting holes are. You're going to slide it into the body, and then you're going to just screw them into place, which is actually going to go in that spot right there in the center. Two screws right through there into the nuts, and it will be installed. Okay, so I've got the body all test fitted, body greeblies all test fitted. Now you will probably need to do a little bit of sanding to make everything fit. I know with the coin slot area, I'm going to have to do a little bit more sanding because that's not fully in, but you can see everything lined up great. I've got everything screwed down. Yeah, as long as as long as you're following the steps, everything should come together nicely. Now, when I was saying you have to be very careful with um, making sure everything is lined up properly. Unfortunately, the center area there didn't line up exactly how it should. So it is slightly off. So it took a little work to get the speaker vents in there, or the vents or whatever. But otherwise, once I got it in, everything fits perfectly. So that's how the body should look. I even went ahead, put the skirt on as a test as well. So everything works out great from mounting everything as it should. I have also gone ahead and added in the center foot support. Now I believe this is just part of the body, which is why I also test fit it. Now I don't have it bolted down just yet because I do like painting the skirt separately. That's just my preference. So I just want to make sure everything is aligned up, and this way I know when the time comes, the nuts will fit perfectly fine. Now those 4 holes there, those are going to be, I'm going to order some threaded rod that I'll be cutting that will go into the center foot itself, which will pop up through those holes, and then I'll hold those down with some wing nuts. So let's talk top ring. First, you need to decide what you want to do for a Lazy Susan, which was going to be part of the dome video. But you're going to need to do a little bit of research on your own to figure out what you'd like to do. A lot of people do like the Tambi Lazy Susan. I, however, like the Granite Earth. It's what I did on my first build for R2. It's what I'm going to be doing on this build as well. So with that, I'm going to use the Granite Earth top ring. Now you can use the other top ring if you decide you want to go a little bit of a cheaper route than what the price is for the Granite Earth Lazy Susan. And then we will get into all that information for the dome video, but just decide how much you want to spend on a Lazy Susan, which the Granite Earth is, I believe, $77, where I believe the Tambi is around 30 to 40. Just depends on what your preference is, what your budget is, and that's going to determine which top ring you're going to print. Okay, time to talk shoulders. So we've got these printed off. How do we install these onto the body? It is a little confusing to a lot of people, so hopefully this will help you guys out. If you're new to droid building, obviously if you've been building these things for a while, you know how to put these together. So real quick for reference, I just have it sitting in here, but you'll be able to see where the nuts are here and where the larger holes are, where the 50mm bolts go. They go right through the body. Once you get that lined up, and make sure that the most important thing about this is on the shoulder hub itself, or the actual shoulder, you're going to see 2, 3, 2, 3. That is determined on what what leg position your droid is going to be in. Obviously, if you have everything lined up with number 2, it's going to basically have the legs going straight up and down in a 2-leg position, where we are shooting for number 3. So you want to make sure that these holes right here where the 50mm bolts are going in, we want to make sure those holes are lined up with where they need to be. So there we go. Typically, how I like to remember it is the way that this is designed. This part just goes to the bottom. Everything now lines up. When you have your leg pressed up against it, you're going to take your M8 30mm bolts. You're going to bolt them through and screw them into the nuts here, so that way the leg is attached. But you're going to want to put your M8 50mm bolts in here first, so that way they go through the body. You can attach this and then tighten everything down. Okay, so we've talked shoulders, we've talked body, we've talked greeblies, we've talked everything that I could possibly think of for this build, trying to give you guys a step-by-step. It is a long process, unfortunately, but it's just how these builds go. Now, real quick too, before I do end this video, I do want to stress more than anything, make sure you are labeling your shoulders. The reason why is because these are not interchangeable. They need to be on the proper side. Otherwise, you're going to have angles all wrong, everything. So that's why I have mine marked for right now, so I know where it's going to go. So I can't stress that enough. Just make sure that that's in the proper spot. So a lot of info on this, but by this point, you should have your R2 body or your R5 or whichever astromech you are wanting to build. There's your body steps, and we should be moving on to the next phase shortly, which we're going to start working on the dome. I'm going to do the dome video a little bit differently, but we'll worry about that at another time. So please feel free to reach out. Any questions, comments, concerns, anything you're not understanding, I'm always going to be available to answer those questions. Certainly check out the Michael Badley Facebook page if you're not familiar with it yet. Tons of info, especially when we get into the top ring, which I briefly mentioned. You're going to need to do your research on some stuff. I can't answer everything because I don't know what your budgets are and things like that. So please, again, like, follow, share if this is the kind of stuff you'd like to build. It does help me out. So on that note, I will catch you guys on the next one, and see you later.